It began with fear, not the kind that keeps children awake at night, but the clinical, budget-approved dread of Cold War strategists imagining Soviet missiles wiping out American communications. In that tense atmosphere of the late 1950s and early 1960s, the US Defense Department turned its gaze toward a peculiar idea, creating a communication system that could survive nuclear war. Out of that grim ambition grew the tangled roots of what we now call the Internet. The Advanced Research Project Agency, ARPA for short, was the government's sandbox for technological moonshots. In 1969, ARPA unveiled something called ARPANET, a network connecting 4 university computers: UCLA, Stanford, UC Santa Barbara, and the University of Utah. These machines, refrigerator-sized beasts with blinking lights and a tendency to crash at inconvenient times, sent the first message, a simple attempt to log in. The system promptly crashed after 2 letters. The word login became LO. This wasn't a network in the modern sense. There was no web browser, no social media, no memes, just basic communication between clunky machines. Yet something fundamental had shifted. Data was no longer locked in place. It could now move. The information age had tiptoed into being. While the Defense Department funded the core infrastructure, researchers and academics began to see ARPANET as a tool for connection, rather than just national defense. The first email was sent in 1971 by Ray Tomlinson, an engineer at BBN Technologies who picked the @ symbol almost at random to separate names from destinations. That small character would go on to hunt inboxes for decades.
It occurred to me that since the mailbox that I was sending these messages to was nothing more than a file, I could send that file across the network instead of keeping it within the same machine. And so I put 2 programs together, modified the code a little bit, and the first email program was created.
Throughout the 1970s, ARPANET grew. Universities linked in, protocols evolved, and the seeds of a more democratic digital landscape began to take root. Still, it was a clubby affair, mostly scientists, researchers, and graduate students using primitive commands to move files or chat across campus-like nodes. There was no real sense of a global network, and certainly no profit motive. It was more like a digital saloon hosted by very earnest people in lab coats. In 1973, a quiet milestone passed almost unnoticed. ARPANET made its first international connection to a university in Norway. That same year, engineers Vinton Cerf and Bob Kahn proposed TCP/IP, a revolutionary protocol that would become the universal language of the Internet. By the early 1980s, it was becoming clear that a unified global network was more than a Cold War contingency plan. It was a new way of structuring knowledge itself.
The home computer market is in very bad shape. The current product doesn't provide enough benefit to really keep on growing and selling to more homes.
Of course, not everyone was on board. Historians still argue whether ARPA and its university collaborators fully grasped what they were unleashing. Some say they saw only the academic potential. Others argue the military always envisioned a vast surveillance infrastructure beneath the scholar machine. The truth, as always, is somewhere in between. Meanwhile, lurking in a corner of the tech world was a truly bizarre innovation: the Plateau system. Developed at the University of Illinois in the 1960s and 70s, Plateau offered message boards, online quizzes, even rudimentary multiplayer games. It ran on amber screens with eerie orange text, and its users accidentally previewed what would later become internet culture, complete with flame wars and virtual dating. The fringe always arrives early, it seems. By the late 1970s, ARPANET had proven its resilience, but it was still cloistered. The average person had never heard of it, let alone used it, and the idea that it might one day reach into every home, every pocket, would have sounded like a fever dream. Perhaps one induced by too many hours spent staring at green-on-black terminals. Yet, the pieces were aligning. Government research, academic curiosity, and open standards were laying down an invisible infrastructure. It was a world built by people who thought more about logic gates than market share. In fact, commercialization was discouraged. It wasn't until 1984 that domain names like .com, .org, and .edu were introduced, marking the beginning of an address system that could welcome more than just government and academic bodies. Still, there were cracks forming in the ivory tower. Hobbyists and hackers working from garages and bedrooms began tapping into these arcane systems. Usenet groups emerged, essentially the Reddit of its day, with names like comp.lang.basic and alt.doctorwho. Conversations buzzed with everything from programming tips to deep philosophical debates, interspersed with ASCII art and the occasional Star Trek fanfiction. By the time ARPANET was officially decommissioned in 1990, it had already been surpassed with something broader and weirder, the Internet proper, built on TCP/IP and fueled by an increasingly unruly crowd. The early 1990s were looming, and with them would come the shriek of dial-up modems, the dawn of chat rooms, and the first stirrings of something both mundane and miraculous: logging on. But before that, one last curiosity. Somewhere in the timeline in the early 80s, a now lost experiment known as Minitel blossomed in France. It predated the World Wide Web, allowed people to book train tickets and chat, and was given freely to millions of French households. It thrived for years, then quietly vanished, like a precognitive dream of the digital age that came too soon. What started as a military lifeline had mutated into a network of possibility, both structured and chaotic. The internet was no longer just an idea, it was a place. Not quite a household name yet, but close enough to knock on the door. When the internet finally stumbled into people's homes, it didn't arrive like a sleek modern appliance. It came in the form of beige boxes, coiled phone cords, and high-pitched screech of dial-up modems. Anyone born after the year 2000 has likely never known the joy of hearing that terrible, triumphant noise, a digital handshake that sounded more like a fax machine having a panic attack. In the 1980s and early 90s, the internet wasn't really the internet yet, at least not in the mainstream sense. What people encountered were online services, semi-isolated kingdoms like CompuServe, Prodigy, and later America Online. Those were the training wheels for a population that had never typed more than a grocery list. Each service came with its own software, its own rules, and its own pricing structures. Most charged by the minute, turning casual web surfing into a strategic financial operation. Families developed complex negotiation system for phone line use. You could practically hear siblings muttering threats through closed doors as someone hogged the modem for just 5 more minutes. One of the first things to flourish in this new jittery space was the bulletin board system, or BBS. BBSs were digital corkboards run by hobbyists with a computer, a phone line, and too much free time. Users could dial in one at a time, yes, one, and post messages, download files, or chat with SysOp, a system operator, who was often also the janitor, dictator, and spiritual guru of their little node. BBS culture was oddly intimate, shaped by local time zones, regional jokes, and inside references that no outsider could ever hope to decode. And yet, the culture was vibrant, anarchic, at times deeply strange. Entire communities blossomed from scratch with names like Fidonet and The Well. Early forums became battlegrounds for sci-fi debates, political manifestos, and extremely questionable jokes. In one notorious incident from the mid-1990s, members of a group called alt.tasteless, infamous for edgy and offensive posts, began flooding another group named rec.pets.cats. This flame war, later dubbed the Meow Wars, became a symbol of just how chaotic and undefended early internet communities could be. Whether it was a spontaneous culture clash or an early form of digital trolling is up for debate. But BBSs, for all their charm, were islands. What began connecting them was the growing popularity of email and Usenet. Email became the killer app of its time, not because it was flashy, but because it was efficient. You could send a message across the country in seconds, which felt like wizardry in an age where fax machines still roamed the earth. Usenet, on the other hand, was sort of a social media crossed with digital Wild West saloon, organized into discussion groups with gloriously geeky names like rec.arts.Star Trek. Usenet had minimal rules and even less moderation. It was in these strange corridors of early digital interaction that many internet norms, flame wars, trolling, even the use of LOL, first took root. This was just sort of the inevitable outcome of unregulated speech, or just the natural result of giving thousands of introverts a place to yell at each other. At this stage, graphical interfaces were rare. Most people navigated through command line screens, text-only wastelands that required memorization, patience, and a decent typing speed. But change was coming, and it came, surprisingly, through online chat. Internet Relay Chat, or IRC, launched in 1988 and introduced something radical: real-time group communication. Suddenly, you weren't just posting into the void and waiting for replies, you were talking, or typing rather. IRC channels emerged for everything: tech support, fan theories, underground music, and occasionally very illegal things that nobody really wanted to know about. The anonymity was intoxicating, and for many it was the first time they felt part of something truly global. Meanwhile, in offices and labs, a quiet revolution was unfolding in the background: the rise of personal computing. The Apple Macintosh and IBM-compatible PCs became more affordable and accessible. Modems shrank from suitcase-sized monstrosities to sleek boxes with blinking LEDs. By the early 90s, even your dentist might have had a PC in the back office. The gap between tech enthusiasts and average users was narrowing. And then there was AOL, America Online.
I think it's the greatest service available.
It's games if you want to have fun. It's information if you want to learn something.
It's a private window to the world.
If BBSs were hand-built bicycles, AOL was a full-blown minivan with cup holders and seat warmers. It provided an all-in-one digital playground, chat rooms, email, news, and a sprawling directory of clickable categories. The moment you installed the AOL software for one of its endlessly distributed CD-ROMs, millions of which still live in desk drawers to this day, you were greeted with a cheery "You've got mail" that somehow made even spam feel like a gift. AOL's user base exploded, especially among those who'd never set foot in a computer science lab, and with it came something else, a massive influx of newbies. Internet veterans bristled at their arrival. Usenet regulars rolled their eyes. But the genie was out of the bottle. The internet was no longer just a place for coders and academics. It was becoming a place for everyone. Alongside this wave came one of the internet's earliest and most enduring battles: the tension between anonymity and accountability. BBSs, IRC, and early forums all offered pseudonyms and avatars. You could reinvent yourself at will, but with AOL and other commercial services, real names, payment information, and user logs began to accumulate. A digital footprint was forming, and few people realized just how permanent it would be. And then, just as people were adjusting to email and chat rooms, a curious thing happened. The World Wide Web showed up. Not as a bang, but a murmur, an academic tool developed in 1990 by British scientist Tim Berners-Lee at CERN. He envisioned it as a way to connect documents using something he called hypertext. Sounds boring, right? Until you realize that this modest invention laid the foundation for nearly every website, hyperlink, and browser you've ever used. Initially, the web was a ghost town. Only a few dozen sites, most of them painfully ugly. But it was easy, it had pictures, it didn't require obscure commands, and most importantly, it let you click. It was the beginning of a shift that would soon engulf the entire online world. If the early 90s were the training montage, the mid to late 90s were the full-blown action sequence. The World Wide Web stopped being a nerdy experiment and turned into a cultural supernova. Suddenly, everyone from bored teenagers to multinational corporations wanted in, and what opened the door was a little thing called the web browser. Mosaic was the first major graphical web browser, released in 1993. It was clunky by modern standards, but at the time it was nothing short of a revelation. With it, users could view images and text together on the same page. Clicking on links felt like teleportation, You could explore art galleries, university archives, and fan pages dedicated to obscure TV shows, all without having to type more than a URL. It was like discovering a library that never closed and had absolutely no shelving system. Mosaic soon gave rise to Netscape Navigator, which by 1995 dominated the browser wars. It was sleek, fast, and had that magical blend of professionalism and startup energy that made venture capitalists salivate. Netscape went public in 1995, and within minutes its stock price soared, ushering in what would later be called the dot-com bubble. That's right, we'd barely figured out how to open a JPEG, and already the money people had arrived. Websites multiplied like digital rabbits. Personal homepages appeared by the millions, thanks in part to services like GeoCities, which gave anyone the tools to slap together a garish site filled with rainbow fonts, MIDI music, and guestbooks. It was charming, it was chaotic, and it was utterly sincere. Somewhere out there, a page still exists dedicated to someone's 1997 hamster, complete with under construction gifs. But business wasn't about to let this new frontier go uncolonized. Suddenly, there were online bookshops, digital auctions, and search engines popping up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Yahoo started as a manually curated list of cool websites and somehow became a tech giant. AltaVista, Lycos, and Excite tried to outdo each other in indexing the chaos. It is debatable whether these early search engines were marvels of engineering or just glorified phone books with attitude. And then there were the ads. Oh, the ads. Banner ads first appeared in 1994. Clunky, blinking rectangles, promising you'd be the millionth visitor or offering miracle diets that probably involved caffeine and regret. At the time, people clicked on them enthusiastically, because, well, novelty. That wouldn't last. With traffic and money flowing in, the web took on a swagger. .com startups emerged daily, often with names that sounded like someone sneezed while naming a domain. Think Flaws, Cosmo, and eToys. Many had no business plan beyond get big, go public, figure out profit later. Venture capital flowed like champagne at a launch party. Offices stocked lava lamps and pinball machines, and engineers were told they were rock stars, visionaries, or occasionally messiahs. Of course, this couldn't last. By 2000, the party began to collapse. Overvalued companies with no revenue folded overnight. Thousands lost jobs. Investors went silent. Pets.com, whose mascot was more famous than its business model, became the poster child for the crash. Still, something had changed. The internet had proven its staying power, not just as a toy, but as a tool. And even amid the rubble, some strange and beautiful things had taken root. Take for instance the birth of blogging. What started as online diaries, literally called weblogs, soon became platforms for politics, culture, and celebrity gossip. People like you and me were suddenly publishing thoughts for the world to see, whether or not the world had asked for them. It was democratic, a little narcissistic, and extremely addictive. Meanwhile, Napster arrived like a comet in 1999. With it came peer-to-peer file sharing and a whole lot of legal trouble. Millions of users began trading music tracks. Illegally, yes, but also effortlessly. The music industry panicked. Lawsuits flew. Metallica got mad. But the writing was on the wall. The internet wasn't just going to disrupt industries. It was going to smash them into tiny, unrecognizable pieces. Fringe tech also bubbled beneath the surface. Virtual pet cemeteries, ASCII art collectives, and fanfiction archives flourished in weird corners of the web. There was even a group in the late 90s that tried to create a web-based religion, complete with digital sermons and online confession. Whether it was parody, art, or genuine belief is still a matter of debate. And lurking in a basement somewhere, figuratively if not literally, a quiet shift was happening. A kid named Larry Page and his friend Sergey Brin were tinkering with a search algorithm based on something they called PageRank. Google launched in 1998, and though it started simply a bare-bones search bar and a logo, it would soon outclass every search engine before it. Because it worked, it gave you what you actually wanted, not what advertisers paid to show you. By the end of the 90s, the internet had become a second skin for many. Teenagers spent hours on AOL Instant Messenger, flirting and fighting in equal measure. Adults cautiously bought plane tickets online. Businesses realized that an email was faster than a fax, and probably less likely to jam. The culture was shifting permanently. But there were shadows too. Online scams, identity theft, and phishing attacks were on the rise. Digital privacy was starting to look more like a polite suggestion than a guarantee. And some folks began to wonder, with all this access, was anyone really in control? It was a fair question, because as the new millennium loomed, the internet was poised to get even stranger, more powerful, and more personal. The age of social media, surveillance, and algorithmic everything was waiting just around the corner. By the time the calendar flipped to the 2000s, the internet had already buried its dial-up roots and outlived its awkward adolescence. What emerged in its place was something sleeker, stickier, and far more intimate. Websites stopped being static brochures and began to evolve into platforms, interactive, personalized, and occasionally uncomfortably invasive. This wasn't just a network of machines anymore, it was a digital reflection of human behavior, and it was about to get weirdly specific. Social media didn't land all at once, it crept in, platform by platform, feature by feature. Friendster and MySpace offered early blueprints, customizable profiles, friend lists, and glittery text boxes that could crash a browser with too much personality. For a brief, glorious window, it was possible to have a top 8 list of best friends and a page that played your favorite song without consent. Narcissism had finally found its user interface. But then came Facebook. Initially restricted to Harvard students in 2004, it soon spread through universities, then high schools, then reluctantly to your Aunt Carol. Unlike MySpace's chaos, Facebook offered minimalist design, uniformity, and the illusion of privacy. People posted real names, real birthdays, real feelings, and the platform in turn learned to monetize those feelings with terrifying precision. Meanwhile, YouTube appeared in 2005 with grainy home videos and cat content, and then rapidly evolved into a behemoth of everything from political commentary to ASMR unboxings. Suddenly, everyone was a broadcaster. And just as suddenly, the line between creator and consumer blurred. A kid with a webcam could become a millionaire. A toddler's dance could go viral in 10 minutes. Whether this democratization of media was cultural liberation or simply a spectacular way to monetize attention spans is up for debate. And attention was the new oil. Platforms learned to algorithmically tailor what you saw, based not on what you asked for, but what you clicked on, hovered over, or even paused near. Google, once a humble search engine, transformed into an omniscient oracle. Its searches became smarter, its ads creepier, and its reach total. The more you interacted, the better it knew you. What started as a convenience became a pattern of surveillance, and most users accepted the trade-off with a shrug and a scroll. Meanwhile, Twitter brought microblogging to the masses, 140 characters at a time. It was snappy, immediate, and oddly poetic. It also became the world's angriest public square. Politicians, celebrities, bots, and the general public scrambled for visibility in a space that often felt like a combination of Roman Forum, high school hallway, and open mic night for conspiracy theories. Instagram turned attention into aesthetics. Here was a place where breakfasts became art and vacations became campaigns. Filters smoothed out reality. Likes became currency. Selfies became performance. And beneath it all, the tech kept learning. What you liked, what you loved, what you secretly hated but couldn't stop looking at, it fed that data back into itself, creating a feedback loop of curated existence. Real life has started to seem pixelated. As the platforms grew, so did their ambitions. Facebook bought Instagram, Google bought YouTube, Amazon bought everything. What had begun as separate digital kingdoms were consolidating into a handful of empires. With smartphones now standard in every pocket, the internet wasn't something you visited anymore, it was something you lived inside. Of course, all this connectivity came with side effects. Privacy eroded slowly, then all at once. Data breaches became routine. Terms of service were unreadable. And revelations like Edward Snowden's 2013 leaks peeled back the curtain on mass surveillance, showing that not only were companies tracking you, but governments were watching too. The internet was no longer just a platform for expression. it had become a tool for observation. Still, it wasn't all doom. Communities flourished, support groups, activism networks, and niche fandoms that found solidarity in digital spaces. Revolutions sparked on Twitter. Grassroots movements were coordinated through group chats. Crowdfunding saved lives. Memes, oddly enough, became a shared global language. A stock photo of a distracted boyfriend could express geopolitical nuance. And if that's not a sign of cultural evolution, what is? On the darker fringe, the rise of the dark web exposed the internet's underbelly. Marketplaces for illicit goods, untraceable communication, and every paranoid fever dream brought to life. Does the dark web represent freedom from authoritarian surveillance or merely a lawless playground for cybercriminals? As usual, the answer is yes. Then came the influencers. Somewhere along the way, being online became a career. YouTube stars gave way to Instagram models, then TikTok creators, each chasing viral fame, brand deals, and algorithmic relevance. Fame had gone from 15 minutes to 15 seconds. Every moment became content. Every content became marketing. And suddenly, your feed knew you better than your friends did. Artificial intelligence crept in too, quietly at first, through autocorrect and voice assistant. Then more boldly, with facial recognition, predictive text, and eerily good deepfakes. The boundary between human and machine became increasingly fuzzy. Chatbots wrote articles. Algorithms recommended partners. Art was generated from code. The internet was thinking, in its own way. And the question shifted from can it to should it? The pandemic of 2020 acted like a stress test for the entire system. Trapped indoors, the world turned fully digital. School, work, weddings, therapy, even funerals. Platforms surged. Video calls replaced eye contact. Loneliness spiked, but so did innovation. It became clear that the internet wasn't just a tool, it was a lifeline. Yet, by the mid-2020s, something else was setting in. Fatigue. People were overwhelmed. Algorithmic timelines felt hollow. Notifications became noise. Some began to digitally detox. Others doubled down, investing in virtual real estate and metaverse dreams. Whether these immersive spaces will revolutionize the internet or simply add another layer of weird remains, as always, up for debate. The internet, once born of paranoia and academic ambition, had grown into something unrecognizable and inescapable. It could amplify truth or bury it in noise. It could build communities or dissolve them. It could make you feel infinite or entirely alone. And yet, despite everything, it endures. In browser and apps, in servers and satellites, in memes and memories. Not just as technology, but as the stitched together story of what humanity chooses to connect and what it decides to click.